Hello, everyone. This is Jimmy Cultist back again with another logic video, and today's subject is how to create a boomerang in third person. So we're going to get started on some basic principles first. The boomerang itself. I've made a sculpt right here. It's not labeled anything, and it's non-collidable. But other than that, it's pretty much just a basic sculpt. I also created a sculpt block to attach it to, which is invisible and non-collidable. And also unlabeled. And after joining the two, like so, in this fashion, I then labeled the group. Actually, I don't think I labeled the group. I could, though. I could label it object. Anyway, after labeling it object, I stamped a chip onto the group, labeled boomerang. And if you're not aware of how to create a group, it's as simple as just clicking on two objects and then pressing this thing, just to remind everyone. Now, first things first, we made an animation using keyframe mode on an action recorder. I'll show you how to get to the action recorder just in case. This is the action recorder. Once you've stamped it out, you can go into keyframe mode, and I select the basic first frame of the boomerang, then the second frame, then the third, and then the fourth, and then the fifth. And that creates a seamless loop where it spins, basically. This is the in-flight boomerang. I also kept the sculpt on hand so that I could duplicate it and put it in the puppet's hand, which is a simple matter of copying it. I would advise using live clone, so that if you want to make any changes, you can, and make sure to live clone the one we used in the sculpt as well. And once it's live cloned, make sure to set this on too. Just grab it with R2 and scope in with L1 and R2 and X. L1, R2 at the same time, and then press X to scope in, and then press X to scope into the puppet's hand group, and align it in whatever way you like. Make sure it's non-collidable, of course. But that's how you get the boomerang in the hand, and we'll talk more about that later. Well, we've got the animation for the spin. Next, we have this little timeline set to loop and set to 200%, and it has classic whoosh, a sound effect from the Dreams sound library. If you want to find lots of good whooshing noises, go to Dramatic Effects and go to Whooshes, and you'll find the classic whoosh in there, among many others, just to mention it. I've also set it to play once, and all this does is create the sound of it spinning. Next, I have stamped out a selector. And I have stamped out a trigger zone, which detects scenery. It detects both non-collidable and invisible scenery. And I've connected the detected wire straight to the B input. This means that when it collides with a wall, it will set off the B input. And we'll talk about why that's good. It's for returning, of course. And next, I've got a timer so that when you throw it a certain distance, it will return after 2.0 seconds. Also connected to the B output. Third, I've got this little chip here, which I've labeled grab. And inside here, I've got this little tag called Boomerang P for boomerang place. And it's directly in the center of the boomerang, and what this is going to do is cause objects to attract to this tag once it's thrown. And I've also got this trigger zone called Boomerang, and it detects anything, any tag labeled Boomerang. And I've got this little trigger zone set up around here. And we're going to take a quick look at our coins to explain how they interact with these things. Now the coin is a group. I made a coin sculpt and combined it with a copied version of this invisible sculpt. And then put a nice little chip on top. But you'll notice the boomerang tag we were talking about earlier coincides with this zone. So basically what that does is it turns on this selector, which turns on this teleporter called Boomerang P, meaning that it will attract to this point and follow the boomerang, allowing you to, you know, pull in coins and such. Now this piece of logic, if you copied the coin a whole ton, I don't know about like how much you could get away with, you'd have to test that, but if you copied it a whole ton, it probably would run up the thermo because of the amount of wires. Not by much, but it is substantial after a while, so keep that in mind. Maybe you don't want your coins to be something that you attract with the boomerang, but you could make other objects, because, you know, if you have fewer objects that you do want to be attracted with the boomerang, you could just do that. I just think that the coins, you know, if you're going to have a lot of them, keep this in mind. Be wise about how you construct your level. Next, we've got this little tag labeled Pick Up. And all it does is interact with a zone that I put inside our puppet. Little B.I. Joe. His tags, in his tags chip, I've added this zone that detects tags labeled pickup, and basically this acts as a hitbox for collecting items and other things. And it will interact with this, which will set off an emitter, which emits this splash effect with a little coin sound effect set to play once. I don't know why it sounds that way. It sounds normal when it's emitted, believe me. But it emits this splash effect around the center of the coin. And if you go to this secondary setting, you'll see Object Just Emitted as an option. If you take a wire from there and connect it to a destroyer, it will destroy the object once it has successfully emitted a coin. And if you wanted to, like say you have a variable for the coins, you could just place a timeline on here and add a variable modifier labeled coin, set to add when powered on, set to 1, and just add the name in here, and this would cause your coin count to go up each time they were collected. Make it a little smaller, perhaps. And set it to play really fast, why not? But yeah, that would basically give you a coin every time you collected and make sure that it wouldn't be destroyed with the coin itself. But that's all there is to the coins and their logic. I believe that they're labeled objects because I've made it so the puppet does not collide with object under any circumstances. They're already non-collidable, but just in case, it's good to be safe. I've also got this little tag in the tags chip labeled camera mount, which we'll get to a little bit later. Let's get back to our boomerang and take a look at some of his logic. Now that I've explained all the methods by which the boomerang, you know, collects things. Also, when it collects a coin, it will come back to you, meaning that the first coin you hit, you know, will cause it to return. If you wanted to disable this aspect, you could just delete this, and it would go straight through a line of coins and bring them all back. Or if you wanted to keep the, you know, zone, but just delete the wire, that also could work. Anyway, here's our basic stance for the boomerang. It's just a mover set to 18%, you know, speed, 100% movement strength, and dampening, and it just flies forward. I've also got an optional rotator, which will cause it to curve. It's not set to local space, so it'll always curve to the right. And I've set the speed to 50 and the dampening to 50. But that's optional. I don't really like it because it causes the boomerang to wobble. Well, I mean, like, it causes it to kind of go out of your general range of where you wanted it to go. I guess it would be cool for certain puzzles, so I mention it just in case you're interested. That's the way to make it curve, if you're familiar with the Zelda games or other games with boomerangs like that. And that's the A output, so that's naturally what it'll be when it's emitted. Next, we have the B output, from which all these wires go into, and this is basically going to be the return state. In here, we have a tag called boomerang return. I mean, not a tag, a trigger zone set to detect a tag called boomerang return. And it's in a little square around the boomerang. And I know we've got boomerang return somewhere in here, but maybe we should get to that later. It's also got a destroyer, so when it hits that tag, it will destroy this whole outfit. And it has a mover, which is set to local space, but it's reversed so that it goes backwards. And we have a look at rotator, which follows a tag called camera mount, which you may recognize in here. And it's set to 500 speed, so it will turn fairly quickly. It's also got a really, generous zone size, just to make sure it attracts to the player properly. And that's pretty much all you need for the boomerang. Now I'll get into some of the logistics of how we make the boomerang, do its thing. I've made this little sculpt, which is invisible and non-collidable, to act as a stand-in for the camera. I've added a chip, labeled it cam. I have added a teleporter, set to match angle, and goes for a tag labeled cam mount. Make sure you capitalize everything correctly and have proper spacing, otherwise it won't properly attract to this tag. But anyway, I've also added a selector, and I've made the B output lead to the camera. So basically when this is active, you'll be able to aim, and this is the camera position right here. I've set it to cut, and pretty much all the other settings are normals. Let's go ahead and scope into this. If you want to test your camera's location, just press L1 and X to edit the camera, and then, move it around. You can also manually move it around this way with R2, but I prefer not to do that. We've also got this little thing here, which is a action recorder on keyframe mode set to loop, and all it really does, if we follow its wire, is turn on this chip, which I will get to in a little bit, but just keep that in mind that this turns on the chip. And we have a projectile chip with a node inside it, and it emits the boomerang, which I've kind of slightly altered the trajectory of the boomerang. You may notice it's not 100%, aligned with the camera's block, but it is aligned with the direction the camera itself is pointing at. So keep that in mind when you're putting these things together. But anyway, we might as well go over and take a look at this chip, since it is important. This is a camera logic chip. I've stamped a piece of logic that's actually in the MM library. If you go to first person puppet, stamp him out. And the reason why I do this is because they have the thresholds mapped really well, and this is the same logic I would use anyway. And I just copy it, stuck it in there, and that's pretty much how I did it. And all this logic is pretty much copied from MM, except for this and this, which I will get to in a minute. And the thresholds, you know, I've taken the liberty of copying this timeline and putting it on, you know, within this other timeline, so keep that in mind. Copying is just L1 and R2 for your information. And the pitch up tag, which, you know, if you're familiar with my other tutorials, you'll know that I've pitched the tag up that controls the camera direction. Make sure you pitch the tag and not the camera sculpt itself. I reiterate, do not pitch the camera itself, only the tag. I say this because apparently there's been some confusion about that. This system will not work unless you're pitching the tag. Just keep that in mind. I've also pitched it down at an almost equal angle to how it pitches up. You know, probably 90 degrees or something. That way, when it's in the middle, it'll be mostly level with the player's line of sight. You could also put a tag in the middle if you want to make sure that you know, have a level view, but yeah, I think it's fine this way. Put a keyframe in the middle, I should say. And just have nothing in it, like this. Set it to linear, and that'll just, you know, stay at the current trajectory, which will be level with the ground, if you really need that. I don't think it's necessary right now. Next, I've pitched the puppet's body to match the camera angle, but I've only modified this area right here, the middle. I'm not touching the rest of him, and that's for a good reason, because I want to add animations where he aims and throws the boomerang, and I don't want to interfere with his ability to pitch up or down by adding those animations, so I've only affected his middle section to make it look like he's aiming. Anyway, that's everything concerning this little baby, so now I'll get on to this. All this does is it's an action recorder set to keyframe mode, and it just turns off his poses chip, which I've put inside another chip. It's just my personal preference. In case I want to turn both off at once, it saves wires. Instead of 2 wires, you can just have 1 to turn off the entire thing. But in this case, you only want to turn off the running poses. And it's set to loop, and it's constantly on, which we'll preview real quick. Just to demonstrate, I'm going to add power to our little thing here. Yeah. Powered on, set to loop. Next, we've got this switch, and all it does is add constant power to our selector, allowing the camera to be active while in play. I've also connected this node to a NOT gate, which goes to the A input. That means that when you're not, you know, applying, when this chip is not on, it will automatically default to your normal view. So when you're holding the boomerang and aiming, you know, the camera's active. When you're not, it will be inactive, and I'll explain how that works in a minute. I also did do one small modification to the MM logic. Originally, there's a little timer right here. This is that timer. It used to be in here, right there, but I put it outside the chip for certain reasons. I know it's slightly confusing, but this timer's output goes into the playhead, which we see here. And the reason why I put it outside is because I want to be able to remap it when the player is done throwing the boomerang. So say you're throwing the boomerang up, you aim up, alright? You throw it, then you stop, okay? You go into normal view, and then, you know, if you re-enter your boomerang aiming state, you'll be looking up again, which is a bit disorienting. You would rather have it level. So I've added a timeline called camera reset, set to play once, and all it does is It has a keyframe in here, which has this little thing turned on, which is keep changes, and it sets it to 0.4, which is basically level with the ground. It's half of 0.8, which in all cases, you know, will be level because the extremes are up and down, and the middle is half. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. It resets this timer, and it's set to keep change. So it'll reset it, but it won't, you know, stick it that way forever. It'll just reset it to keep changes once, and then you can go back to modifying it again when the power's on. I've also added a little camera set to cut, and the reason why is because I want to avoid disorientation when you're done aiming and come out and see the player, you know, and get to a more natural viewpoint instead of having the camera wiggle all around everywhere. Anyway, we should talk about what's powering our camera controls on, and that is a wireless receiver labeled to detect a wireless transmitter called Camera On. I haven't really modified the zone because it's not necessary. By default, they're in the right positions. And we'll get into how this thing is triggered a little bit later. But for now, all you need to know is that's the complete camera controls. In here, we have the throw ability. And I'll explain how this works. It may look a little complicated. So first of all, we're going to talk about what button we're using to throw the boomerang. It's R1. Follow the wire in here, it goes to a node connected to a timer set to positional 0.2, so it's fairly quick. You can whip out your boomerang real fast. And it connects to a timeline. Timer output goes to the playhead, which you may recognize from earlier on that other piece of logic. Same principle, slightly different effect though. And in here we have the Camera On wireless receiver, which will require power in order to operate. Make sure that you connect a wire to this in order to, you know, signal from the transceiver. So I've put a switch in here which I've connected to this signal to receiver input. And it affects this right here. Camera on, camera on. Transmitter, receiver. So the camera will be on when we've hit the value of, you know, when we've hit the maximum value, this switch and this receiver will be on, causing us to have the camera active. I also have a pose, which is just one frame of an action recorder of him doing this pose. Notice how I've not affected his middle, so it won't interfere with his ability to aim up and down, just his upper body. I also have this little switch here, which I turned the power, you know, I just connected a counter to the power here. And I'll explain how this works. This switch connects to the throw ability, which you'll see over there. And you're probably wondering, Jimmy, how do I keep him from throwing the minute I'm aiming if this is how he, you know, triggers the throw? Well, it's simple. Because I've added this timeline, now, well, it's not a timeline, it's a counter. But I've added this counter full to the power of the switch. So this switch is not ordinarily active until this counter is on. And you're probably wondering, well, how is this counter turned on? It's this red thing here. This red switch goes to the plus symbol here, or the increase count. And it only has a value of 1, so it'll be on at maximum capacity once this is hit. And basically this is kind of like a trial gate. I don't quite know how to describe it, but basically this is the way it works. Full power, switch on, then when you release power to throw, this thing will be active and allow you to throw. So it's like a check. In, check, back, fire. That's how it works. Took a little bit of thinking to come up with that, so you're welcome. Anyway, let's go over here. And the power of this green switch connects to a node with a NOT gate connected to its power. And the node connects to a timeline set to play once. Inside the timeline, I have placed a switch to prevent playback. It connects to the NOT gate, thus preventing us from, prematurely causing the playback to occur, I've also got... Ooh, what's this? A transmitter set to camera on. That means during our throw cycle, the camera will still be active because we have it on this timeline. I've also connected the power from this switch to this transmitter signal. Make sure you do that, otherwise this won't work properly. But basically, this keeps the camera active while we're throwing. Now, if you wanted to get rid of this, just delete that, and you'll be hunky-dory. If you don't want the camera still, in aim mode while you're throwing, that'll stop it from happening, so keep that in mind. I put another timeline within this timeline, set to sustain, and inside here I have a sound effect, classic whoosh for when we throw the boomerang, and an action recorder set to keyframe mode, which turns off all animations, all of them. And that's kind of all that action recorder does, I guess. I'll double check just to make sure. Oh, it does something in here. It turns off the pose. This is necessary because otherwise this aiming pose will interrupt our throwing pose that we have up here. I'll cover the throwing pose real quick. Oh, and if you want to know how to do this, just scope in L1 and square, power off with X. That's how you do it. Anyway, here's the throwing pose. And I just took our aiming pose and added a few more frames to it of him, throwing. Very simple. And then we've got this little thing here, which is going to trigger our projectile. It's a switch, and we're going to follow its wires to their logical places. One thing it does is reset this counter from earlier. That way, once it's thrown, this whole process can be repeated again when the boomerang has returned. Another thing it does is alter this state, which I'll talk about later. All you need to know for now is that it goes to the B input of this selector, which we're going to be adding. You might as well add it right now in continuity, It would make it easier to keep track of this later. But basically, yeah, it does that, and it goes all the way down here into our camera chip, which you may remember from earlier. So when the camera is active, this ability is active, and we've added a chip called projectile, and within here we have a node. A node connected to an emitter set to once, and an emitted lifetime of infinite. And all it does is emit our boomerang that I was mentioning earlier. And it roughly lines up with the viewpoint of the camera. So that's the entire firing process, but now we've got to talk about how it returns to you. How do you make the boomerang come back and affect your, that whole situation? Well, we're going to go ahead and talk about that. You'll remember the selector from earlier, but also you're going to want a tag called Boomerang Return, which, if you call us opening up our boomerang, in the return chip there is a zone which detects a tag called Boomerang Return. And this is why we've set that up. Make sure you set it a little bit in front of the player so that it interacts with this zone properly. Once the zone collides with this tag, it will activate a node with a NOT gate connected to the power. And here we have a timeline set to play once, similar to what we had earlier. And we have a switch preventing playback as always. And we have a sound effect for when the boomerang returns, classic whoosh again. And we have the pose that we used earlier for throwing, only I've made it faster by about 158. So that's 58% more than 100%. And I've set it to reverse, so it'll look like it's being caught rather than being thrown. Very nifty reuse, you know, reuse of assets, recycling. Oh, another thing I should mention is this switch goes to the A output in order to reset this process. So when the boomerang returns, it'll set it to caught. And there's not really much in this chip. You know, when it returns, boomerang is here. All it does is control the boomerang's invisibility. So basically, let's go to the boomerang. Normally, it's invisible. I'll show you what I mean. Unless I've got this wrong. Maybe normally the power is off? Yes, normally the power is off. Normally the boomerang's power is off. But with this action recorder, I turn it on, meaning that when this is active, it will always be visible, but when it switches to B, it will no longer be visible. So this is the throw switch. It will cease to be visible as soon as the boomerang leaves your hands, making it pretty seamless. Even though these are two different sculpts, it'll make it look like they're one, you know, object being thrown. But that's all for this chip, which is basically your bog standard, you know, boomerang here. For boomerang gone, which is basically, you know, the throw state, I'm going to add a few things in here. I'm going to show you this, preview it with it on, because I think it's safer to show things off when the power's active. We have a action recorder set to keyframe mode, set to loop. And what is it controlling, you may ask? It's controlling your ability to throw again. That way, once the boomerang is thrown, you will not be able to throw it again. You know, because that would be weird. How can you throw something you don't have? And all it does is turn off the power of this NOT gate, preventing another throw. Very simple. We also have this little switch here called In Flight. And what it does is keep our camera powered on during flight. If you don't want the camera powered on during flight, delete this wire and it'll fix that problem. Another thing it does is it keeps this active during flight. Again, I actually think this wire might be redundant. So, yeah, go ahead and delete that. And it connects to this, which, you know, to be honest, all those wires are redundant. The only one you really need is this one connecting to the transmitter that says camera on. Oh well. More efficient, I guess. Now let's take a look at things and see how they work. It's been a complicated process, but it should be good. Oh. We're going to power off our projectile. It normally won't be powered on. I only did that for demonstration purposes. Once you use the emitter, it'll just naturally be powered off, so you don't have to do that. Keep that in mind. Alright, so we're going to hold R1, and this is our aiming stance, and so long as we hold the trigger, it's not going to fly anywhere, and we can aim up and down, and it looks fairly, you know, fairly good, except for this. This is a little strange. What's going on here? I have a theory about what's going on there. It's probably just this. It needs to go further. Anyway, as long as we're holding the trigger, it will not fly. You can even jump in this state. And you can run and it won't wobble around too much. And then when you let go, it flies out. Notice how the camera is still active. If you want to get rid of that, though, just remember what I said about deleting those particular bits of logic that keep it active during throwing mode. I could even make a method by which it focuses on the boomerang while in flight, but I feel like that might be a little janky. Like, I think it's better this way, where you can free aim. And we'll demonstrate how it can pull in coins. It flies quite far, too. If you want to limit how far its maximum, draw distance is, like, look at that, that's pretty far. But if you want to limit that, it's as simple as modifying this timer. Just add less time to it, and it'll come back to you earlier if you really want that. But yes, that's pretty much all the stuff I have to say on the subject of the boomerang. I feel like this would be pretty fun to implement in a game. It was requested by one of our fans, whom I cannot remember the name of. Sorry about that. But it was a good request, it's a fun idea, and I hope it works in your game. And I hope this was helpful and not too difficult to follow. There are some steps that get a little bit spaghetti brain, but for the most part, fairly simple compared to some things. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. If you would like to support us financially, consider clicking the join button to become a member and unlock perks. You can also leave a super thanks in the comments, which we would appreciate. That's all for now. Goodbye.